Ba-da-ba-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba. All right. Promoter 101. 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 Promoter 101.
I am Barbara Hubbard from New Mexico State, retired. We're in Promoter 101.
It's the Promoter 101 podcast. I'm Dan Steinberg of Emporium Presents and hanging out with my dear friend W. Luke Pierce of Works Entertainment. And this is a big one, Luke. We've got the biggest agent in the world joining us today.
That is right. Welcome back, everybody, to the special 220th episode of Promoter 101. We are excited to be here because we are sitting down with the kingpin of CAA Music, the head of worldwide music and managing director, partner at CAA, Mr. Rob Light will be on this podcast in just a bit.
That weren't enough. Also, NiteLite Productions, Don Kronberg is going to give us the independent promoter view of running a business during COVID-19.
And plus, legendary promoter and now author here with his new book, All Excess. That's EXCE, $, Mr. Danny Zalesko, Danny Z on the podcast today, talking about his memoir and some memories in more than 40 years of concerts.
And away we go with episode 220 of the Promoter 101 podcast starts right now.
Hi, this is John Scher from Metropolitan Entertainment Consultants, Promoter 101.
News of the week.
Luke, pandemic going on, lots of this and that and other, mostly rumors, but things seem to be happening. What are you catching up with? What's in your plate?
Well, Dan, big news from Saturday morning here as we record this podcast, but we've got reports that Q Prime is for sale. That's right. The management business run by Cliff Bernstein and Peter Minch is in negotiations, according to Hits Daily Double, with Ron Burkle's Ukaipa. Now, Ron has made significant investments during COVID in several music and entertainment properties, including APA, where he made a large cash investment as well, too. So very interesting to see private equity swarming into that space, Dan, for a band that's got Metallica, Black Keys, Muse, Eric Church, Brothers Osborne, all in the mix there. They're saying this might fetch for as much as $80 million in this deal, which seems huge to me, Dan.
Now, when you think about the fact that they have the Chili Peppers.
The scuttlebutt, according to Hits Daily Double, is that Q Prime no longer reps Red Hot Chili Peppers. A new piece of news as well, too, that we're talking about.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Now, Dan, for a music business that primarily has wide exposures like everything to live right now, I'm surprised to see such valuations thrown out into the mix for a management business that is largely a service business there, which makes me think that we all know that Cliff, Peter have done a phenomenal job over the years building a great company, a great culture, a great roster. To be fetching that high of valuations during this time just really shows me the strength of their business, as well as the fact that people are definitely buying into the future of the music business. You can't be buying into it right now for 2020 books or even 2021 books. These people are in it for the long haul, looking beyond. And that, to me, speaks confidence to the eventual recovery of our business, that some really sharp people in Burkle and company, as well as several other private equity shops that have made investments during this time, are continuing to double down in our space.
To quote Peter himself, Cliff and Peter are the smartest guys in the room, if they do say so themselves.
Well,
I can't disagree with them. They're geniuses, but it is always incredible that he's willing to tell you right to your face.
Well, no doubt the men are definitely on top of their game right now. Even in all this craziness aside here, to be making a move like this seems like a huge opportunity for them, and very excited to see where the coverage of this continues here, and excited as well to follow just all the M&A money flying into this space during this time.
There's a lot going on with the election right now, and while we're not a political podcast, I think the awesome novelty of some of the casts getting back together, Princess Bride, Dazed and Confused, Father of the Bride 3, and West Wing as well, all getting together to get the vote out, either to raise money. These things seem to be coming out of the woodwork left and right now. The Veep cast, last night you had the West Wing on Late Night with Colbert. That was Friday night's episode. If you want to go back and check that out, the whole episode was about West Wing getting back together, and a rare appearance with Sorkin, with Martin Sheen, Allison Janney, Bradley Woodford. This is exciting, not only as West Wing nerds, but like there's some great novelty that COVID is like getting people really creative and excited to get the vote out and getting creative and doing things that we wouldn't normally get.
I mean, you have to be pivoting to what is next for this world where we will be prevented from gathering here in the States feasibly and safely until the middle of next year. So for any campaign out there, you see them getting very creative. The Biden campaign, for example, partnering with Cameo, the video service that allows celebrities, influencers, athletes, and now politicians to make pre-recorded videos and send them out to fans. They are partnering with Cameo to raise money for voter registration efforts, for campaign efforts. People are getting very creative, and it's great to see what's happening right now during this space. And I think, Dan, we will turn to a place where we do have concerts again, too, but we're learning so much in these past 6-7 months about what people will enjoy from home versus what they will actually want to go out and experience for live. And I'm very curious as to where it takes us next.
Well, I think with Fast Times with Ridgemont High, we've seen them also do something very similar with the cast and bringing in different people to play different parts. You got Aniston and Pitt included, with Sean Penn bringing everybody together to raise money. I think that people are reacting to this so well. This is going to become part of Broadway touring, where you see these table reads of famous movies with different parts of cast and different celebrities being brought in as part of Broadway series, as part of the seasons at venues. I think people are really going to enjoy this. And what a great thing. If you know a movie so well and you can get Robin Wright on stage reading Princess Bride with Billy Crystal, it's just like, I'd pay to see that. Why not?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people would. We're seeing crazy numbers for table reads for Princess Bride for the Wisconsin Democrats when that was aired with, they had Manny Patinkin and Carrie L was already doing their bits to help Democrats get registered voters in the state of Wisconsin.
Final Tap's doing it too next week, I think. I mean, the numbers are really climbing on these things. Like, you're starting to really see them. And the great thing is they're all doing it for great causes. You're not seeing people go, what a great way to cash in. I mean, that's coming. You know it's coming. But right now, everybody's got their mind on the election and how we've got this big get out the vote campaign. Doesn't matter who you vote for, just vote, so long as, you vote for Biden.
That is almost a play on a Will Bailey line from The West Wing. And Josh Malina, sadly, not going to be in the reunion on HBO Max when it airs on October 15th. One of the best episodes of season 4, Hartsfield Landing, about the town of Hartsfield Landing, New Hampshire, and how they vote right after midnight in every election. It's a wonderful episode full of some great quotes that I know Dan likes. We're going to see a little chess between Richard Schiff and Martin Sheen in the Oval Office scene about seeing the whole board. It's a great, great moment.
Right, but Rob Lowe will be back because he wasn't out of the cast at that point. So that's the change up where we lose Josh. So that's good.
It's not quite there yet. It's remember, it's leading into the election. It's the New Hampshire primaries leading into the election there that Sam Seaborn would, at the end of those elections, of course, go out to California and get walloped on in an election for Congress out there in a special election. Fine, Dan and I, as we are thinking about starting another podcast just about the West Wing, or at least reaction videos of Dan and I watching the West Wing on HBO Max when this comes out. So this episode brought to you by When We All Vote. When We All Vote, there's a West Wing episode on HBO Max next week.
So there's a lot of rumors flying around. As things get more solid, we'll start to hopefully get into those. Although, quite honestly, we're kind of going show by show. I don't think either one of us know if we're doing another episode after each one. It just kind of seems like, okay, we're still in this, and here's a good conversation to have. So maybe this is the last episode. Who knows?
I hope not, Dan.
If we're going to go out on one, this is the one to go out on. I mean, Rob Light here, and how kind of poetic, right? We started the whole thing with the big guy at CAA, Tom Ross, and to finish with the big guy currently at CAA, Rob. It's kind of poetic. It kind of should be.
Well, I think there's a few other people, Dan, that I know you would love to have on the podcast as well, too. So I can't quite say that for sure feels like the truth to me on that front of things. We do got to talk, Dan, for a second about some things this week, a little in memoriam. Obviously, rock legend Eddie Van Halen passing away this week at the age of 65 after a battle with cancer, and a lot of people stepping forward to express their sympathies and condolences for the rock legend, Dan, yourself among them, online. Any memories about Van Halen, any influence that you want to share for our listeners today?
Yeah, I mean, it was the first album I ever bought was 1984, so deep connection to the band. And, whether it's Hagar or whether it's Lee Roth, they just rocked, and they were able to do it with two different singers that were amazing.
Yeah.
Did they have the guy from Extreme, or was it Motley Crue that had the guy from they had the guy from Extreme, right? Because I think after Sammy, they brought the guy in from Extreme. People didn't really love that, and then they wound up doing the reunion with Lee Roth. That's how I seem to remember it.
Little known fact, Dan, I don't know a single song by Van Halen or Led Zeppelin, for that matter. True story. Stairway to Heaven. That's one. Got that one. Speaking of Led Zeppelin, Dan, there's a lot of controversy centering around the Supreme Court this week with the, of course, death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg a few weeks ago and the looming nomination coming from the White House. But Led Zeppelin appeared in the Supreme Court this week as they ended a 6-year-long copyright battle over their song Stairway to Heaven. If you weren't familiar with it, there's a fight between Randy Wolf's or Randy California's estate, a legal battle brought forth accusing Robert Plant and Jimmy Page of copying that opening riff of Stairway to Heaven from the Spirit song Taurus. So if you have ever heard those two songs here, there's a contentious legal battle that has been looming for almost 6 years now in the court systems and finally brought before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which ruled in March that Stairway to Heaven didn't infringe on that song. And now the Supreme Court refused to hear the case following a petition followed by a Spirit's Randy Wolf or Randy California earlier this week. So thus ends a very protracted legal battle for Robert Plant and Jimmy Page, putting them in the clear for not copying that song. I'm always interested, Dan, about some of these battles that take forever. I mean, we're probably talking about $1.5 million in legal fees that were probably racked up on both sides of this for a 6-year legal battle like that. I mean,
it's the most requested song at radio of all time. So you're talking about no small part of royalties. So to protect that money and to fight for that money kind of makes sense.
Absolutely. To defend it is absolutely crazy. I mean, I always think it's bizarre when music cases end up in front of the Supreme Court. But I mean, these are very important cases in many cases in terms of what they establish for precedent within the law. So the fact that the Ninth Circuit Court's going to be upheld here and the Supreme Court is not going to hear this case is very, very interesting.
The best part of you going from Van Halen to Ruth Bader Ginsburg is it's never happened at any dinner table anywhere else, ever. Before we move on, Extreme's Gary Cherone did join Van Halen in 1996. So there were 3 singers. Of course, only 2 of them actually were cool, Sammy and David. And all of us tend to ignore the Extreme years as they were not.
Little history for y'all in there in case y'all needed a little bit more detail. The 202 class about Van Halen and their group.
I was thinking that what they never did was the tour with Sammy and David, which was funny because Sammy and David toured together after they both left the act and had an amphitheater tour that didn't do so great. But if they were to have ever done, since they were all kind of friends at the end, a tour where both singers had gone out with the group, I think that would have been cool with Michael Anthony coming back. I think people would have really loved that. And maybe now there's some kind of tribute thing to Eddie they could do where they bring the whole family back together. I don't think anybody really wants to invite Gary because, fuck Gary. But I don't think we've heard the last of Van Halen.
I don't think so either.
This is Braden Roundtree. I work at WME and I'm on Promoter 101.
Up first in Promoter 101, we've got legendary promoter and now author of the new book, All Excess, Danny Zalesko. Welcome to the podcast, Danny Z.
We've got a rare visit from an author. This one actually is a music industry book written by one of our own. The book is called All Excess with $2 for the S's in excess. And it's written by concert promoter extraordinaire and now author Danny Zalesko. Danny, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Dan, how are you?
Excited. So is the book a novel, a graphic novel about your love for the fantasy world? Or is this a music industry book?
Well, it's a little bit of both. There's some good stories and they're good tales. A couple of them I blew up, probably bigger than life, but most of it's pretty accurate. It's kind of like something that wrote itself because it happened. And then, you got to do your best to comb through all the dead brain cells to try to figure out the order of things and what happened. For instance, Andrew Dice Clay's in the book. And I remember this story that I tell in there about him and Bill Maher working together. And his version of it is completely different. Mine is correct. But it's funny how people have different memories of things. It must have happened, at least 15, maybe 20 years ago. So, there's other things that people bring up to me, just like I'm sure they do to you, about stuff that happened a long time ago, or remember this, or you met me, and it's like a blank. You're in another place when you're doing shows and you're knee deep in it. I'm not talking about sitting around having a drink with somebody, but when you're actually involved with doing stuff at an actual show, it renders everything else that everybody else is doing, which is partying and having fun, kind of secondary to you, and you forget what they remember.
All right, so let's take a second and talk about your career. For those of you that don't know Danny was the game of independent promoters when it came to Arizona, New Mexico, Las Vegas. Ran around a lot, San Diego and some of the other markets too. But really, if you're playing Arizona, New Mexico, and a lot of Vegas, almost all of the major acts went through Danny. When it was broken up as the independent promoters before the roll-up, Danny owned those markets. And there were some tours that you did extensively. You were super involved with Whitney Houston on a national level. You and Jam, you guys were stepping up on bigger level. But like Arizona was your bread and butter. If you played Arizona, Evening Star was the call, and that was your company. Like you built Arizona concert market from the ground up.
Yeah, I completely agree. It was interesting how it happened, just following one step after another as far as how it expanded. I mean, there's only so much you could do in Arizona. And I looked at New Mexico and Vegas very much the same way that I looked at Arizona, which was nobody was really servicing the markets on a day-to-day basis. In Vegas, they didn't have very many facilities to do shows. There was the showrooms and the ballrooms and, you know, all the typical casino things. But our kind of music, our kind of shows were not the norm the way they are today in Las Vegas. Las Vegas was still very much your parents' or their friends' place. It wasn't like for kids. It wasn't for teenagers. It wasn't for 20, 30-year-olds the way it is today. The younger people have chased a lot of the older people out of Las Vegas.
You were big on that early on. I mean, little things like getting the Grateful Dead to play Vegas for 3 nights. The weekend school got out, so all the kids drove through Vegas on the way home.
I can take credit for helping promote that show and being a partner in it, but Bill Graham and Bob Barsotti and his brother Peter were really the kings of that one that made that happen. I'd never done the Dead in Vegas, but Bill, being the kind of guy that he was, plus I don't think he was sure the shows were going to sell the way they did. Otherwise, he might not have let me in. I don't know. I'd like to think he would. But that was, like you said, that was a market that at the Aladdin Hotel, this was in the 80s, the Aladdin and then Thomas and Mack and a little place called the Hundreds were the places we did most of our shows until the 90s when MGM and Mandalay came about. And this was when MGM and Mandalay were at opposite ends. They weren't under the same roof the way they are now. So it was great because one place we booked, the other one would be open, and groups were okay with playing either building, even though Mandalay is smaller than MGM. A lot of groups played there just because MGM was booked. So the 80s and 90s were in Vegas the most interesting for me. What followed after that, after the consolidation, it turned into another animal altogether. And by then I was with Live Nation or Clear Channel in the 2000s. So I was kind of done with Vegas at that point because these companies all had people that just worked in Vegas, and the buildings were also very aggressive. So I got there at a time where it was new, and it was really, really cool doing all those shows up there.
You mentioned Bill Graham. Now, I think anybody that knows concert promotion knows he's the guy with starting the modern day concert setup. And you, early on getting into the business, had a relationship with him.
I went out to Berkeley after my senior year in high school. I was 17, and I went out there fully with the intention of getting a job from him or with him. I'd never met him to that point, but I did pretty soon. The second day I was there, I managed to unload some equipment off of a Yes truck. I wasn't hired. I wasn't acknowledged. I acted like I was with both camps. So half the day I was talking with an English accent, and the other half I was talking like I was from San Francisco. And
you just jumped on the back of the trunk and just started grabbing stuff, right? And
right. There was a guy named Twiggs Linden who used to work with the Allman Brothers. He's not around anymore. But he was the one that told me to do that the night before at an Allman Brothers show there at the Berkeley Community Theater. And Bob Barsotti was just graduating like I did. He was a senior in high school, and he was the high school concert rep for BCT. It's just so funny. And Bill busted me. It was at dinner time. He picked me up by the collar and goes, "Who belongs to this kid?" You know, he said, "You got a lot of chutzpah for doing that." And I hung out with him the rest of the night, had a blast, carried Johnny Winter's Flying V guitar out of the station wagon right out of rehab. But I didn't get a job, and I moved back to Illinois, and I kept in touch with Bill. At one point, he offered to hire me for Denver because his partner up there who I shall leave nameless as he's no longer with us. He was having a hard time with him and he offered me the job there. And I said, well, how much is that going to pay? And he says, $400. I go, really? $400 a week? That ain't bad. This is 1973 or 74. He goes, no, $400 a month. I said, Bill, I'm sorry. I'm not going to poverty job, even working for you. It probably would have been a good move for me, but my dad and a friend of mine and his dad had just given me $11,000 as my bankroll to go out and do some shows, which I lost that summer of 74. And it took me, a while to get going. And I kept whatever momentum or whatever contacts that I'd made in that short time and used them as good as I got on the Stars Born concert that Bill Graham produced for Barbra Streisand. That turned into a great thing. I mean, I'm still great friends with Christopherson to this day. And it really opened up my world with Bill. And I started becoming somebody, as a kid, a nobody in his eyes at that time. But we grew to over the next, I guess it was 15, 16 years. We grew to be very close. And it's one of my favorite friendships that I've ever had.
Okay, so let's talk about the book, right? I've had the ability to read a few of the chapters, and I'm sure a lot of people online have seen you put up the first couple chapters for free to tease it a little bit. White Castle gave you the boxes to send this out. What's the story with the White Castle ties? That's awesome.
Well, I've been a big White Castle fan my whole life. We used to get a bag of 10 of those burgers for $1 back in the day when I was a kid. That would be something my dad would splurge on, Well, Alice Cooper's always been a huge White Castle fan. In fact, on one of his laminates, Toby Mamus put White Castle logo on one of them, which was beautiful. Last year, they decided to finally open up a restaurant here in Scottsdale. Alice hooked me up with them. I became friendly with them. And the next thing you know, they're having a ceremony for us in Nashville on Tuesday. Me and John Prine and Tommy Shaw from Styx are being inducted into the Craver Hall of Fame at White Castle. So I became friends with a guy called Jamie Richardson, who's a vice president there, nice guy. I said, hey, I'm putting this book out. Do you have any kind of boxes like those Crave cases, but which are way too big? He goes, yeah, we got these new one called Crave clutches. And they're like little boxes that I don't know I haven't seen how many they fit in there. I imagine they could probably fit about 10 or 12 burgers in there.
Yeah, because Crave case is what, like 24?
30. I haven't ordered or seen a Crave the Crave clutch in action yet, but it's a cute little box that fits the book, which is 8.5 by 11 perfectly. And I'm going to include some surprises in there. We've been taking orders for a couple weeks, and I was just advised today I'm going to have a more deluxe, better cover because the one they had wasn't so good, and it's going to put me back a week in terms of when I can ship them out. But we've already sold a whole lot of them online, and I got to sign a bunch of books, and we're going to mail them out, fulfill it from here, which is nuts. But guess what? We have some time in our hands.
Where is it available to our listeners?
Go to dzplive.com.
dzplive.com, which stands for Danny Zalesko Presents.
dzplive.com, and it's $39.95, which includes shipping.
The book is called All Excess. Get it at dzplive.com in your brand new White Castle clutch box. Order now. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
Thrilled to have my friend and author, Danny Zalesko, right here on Promoter 101.
This is Alex Hardy, one of the partners at Coda, and I'm on Promoter 101.
Tweets of the week.
Ladies and gentlemen, it wouldn't be Promoter 101 if we didn't talk about some of the hashtag Promoter 101 tweets of the week. Now, Dan has been very quiet, surprisingly, on Twitter, except if you're a movie fan, in which case you should go check out Dan's pandemic reviews. He's reviewing probably 7 or 10 movies a week, Dan. You are keeping up a pretty good clip. Anything you're watching this week that you like?
The family's really getting to the Marvel comic movies. So we're halfway through phase 2. Guardians of the Galaxy is tonight. We saw the second Captain America movie last night, which was much better than the first Captain America movie. But we're going in order. Really enjoying them. Good family time. And they're all on Disney Plus. All except the Hulk for some reason.
So, Dan, we had to reach back into the vault because some of these are classic tweets. You've been keeping up on the movies, and we appreciate that. But we had to go back in the vault, open it up here, talk a little bit about some classic tweets you have made. And we're going to start here. I have been having the hardest time trying to add Microsoft Office onto my typewriter.
It's kind of a Stephen Wright one, kind of make you think a little bit, huh?
Or this one. There should be grave penalties for calling a wrong number before 7 a.m.
Man, this one sucks. Time zones are important. My sleep is more important than yours, I think, sometimes.
Avoid turning one winning show into two losers by adding the second show too quickly.
Now, this has always been a long time issue, turning one winner into two losers, like figuring out that moment when it's right to add the second show, or if it's even really needed, no matter how much everybody wants it. It is always nice that it fucks up the scalpers, though. Really floods the market with extra tickets and totally fucks those guys up. I'm always a fan of fucking up the scalpers.
That'll do it for Tweets of the Week. If you are not following Dan on Twitter, you're missing a wealth of information, also movie reviews. So keep up with him. He's at the Jew on Twitter.
Hi, I'm Holly Gleason, editor of Woman Walk the Line, here at Promoter 101, where they know how to get it done.
Established in 2016, Promoter 101 and its illustrious founding fathers, Sir Daniel Steinberg and the one and only W. Lucas Pierce, have fermented like the finest of wines. And after almost 4 years of bringing you only the most exquisite, educational, and thought-provoking interviews, it is with great pleasure that we bestow unto you the Promoter 101 Masterclass Sessions.
Masterclass.
Well, everybody, this is the main event. This is the goods. This is what you came here for. Our next guest is a 35-year veteran of the music business, worldwide head of music, managing director, and partner at Creative Artists Agency, where he looks over the entire music department and is agent to some of the biggest stars on the planet. This is truly a masterclass in music business, passion, leadership, and history. You should all buckle up, sit back as we sit down with CAA Worldwide Head of Music, Mr. Rob Light.
This is one we've been waiting for a very long time. Arguably one of the biggest agents in the world, if not the biggest. The head of music department and partner, managing director of leading entertainment and the sports agency, Creative Artist Agency, better known as CAA. Rob Light, welcome to Promoter 101.
I'm glad to finally do this. Thank you for having me.
We appreciate you having so many of your amazing agents on as well, too. I mean, CAA has been such a wonderful wealth of information for our listeners. We've had some phenomenal guests on from your team as well, too. And so it's nothing better to sit here and speak with the man himself about what's going on in the world. So we're excited to have you.
Thank you for the kind words. I'm blessed to work with the people I work with. They teach me as much as I teach them.
Well, let's jump back to the early days and talk about your days at Syracuse and how you found your way to the music industry. Let's start there.
Well, I went to school when I was 17. I skipped my senior year of high school. I had gotten into some trouble as a high school student. And while I was bright enough to go to college, my parents pushed me a year early so I wouldn't go sort of down a rabbit hole. So I left for school at 17. I went to the Newhouse School at Syracuse, which is the same place as, John Sykes and Phil Quateraro and Steve Leeds and Harvey Leeds and all classmates of mine, sort of that Syracuse mafia of the music industry. I went to be a writer. It was 1974 during Watergate, and I loved to write, and I still write a lot today. Working for the school newspaper, I wrote an article on the concert committee. And when I read it back, when it was in the paper a couple of days later, I was so enamored with what I had written about the committee and how much excitement it created. And I love music. I was a music freak. That I joined the concert committee, and end of my sophomore year was the head of the committee. Small sidebar, my sophomore year, there was a collegiate conference, and Phil Q and I were both set to go, and I couldn't go at the last second because I had a midterm. And Phil went, and he got offered the A&M college rep job, and he went on to be a great record executive. And Sykes went and got offered the CBS job. And I often wonder if I had gone what I've gone down the record company road. But nonetheless, I started running the concert committee, did that my junior and senior year, produced a lot of great events at Syracuse, worked with some great people. In the spring of my senior year, started applying to jobs at different talent agencies, thinking that I wanted to be in the live side of it. The real catalyst, besides doing it at school, in the summer of 1975, I had just been exposed to Bruce Springsteen my freshman year at college and went to see him at the Bottom Line. Went 2 nights, waited online 10 hours to buy tickets. And when I saw that show, I remember coming home and saying to my parents, I don't care what it is. I got to work in this business. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I want to be in the music business. And if you were to walk in my office today, that ticket is still framed on my wall from almost 40 years ago when I first saw him play. So I got offered a job at ICM. William Morris turned me down. I still have the rejection letter framed in my office hanging on the wall. I started ICM in May of 1978.
Can you go back to the writer stuff at the very beginning during school? Were you trying to be a journalist? Were you trying to write as an author? Where were you going with
A little bit of everything. I loved writing for newspapers. I've written a couple of screenplays. I'm working on a book. I just love to write. It's something that's always been a part of who I am. And one day maybe I'll actually let people read all the stuff, but I've written a lot.
From ICM to CAA, how was that transition from the start of music to where you found yourself in the 80s?
Let me give you a couple of tidbits from my ICM days, if you don't mind me sort of going off on a tangent here. So I started ICM. I got out of the mailroom in 7 days. And
Whoa, really?
You're going to think I'm a bit of a jerk, but I'll tell you the story. So I was in the mailroom, and back those days, you were in the mailroom for 6 months to a year. I almost quit because I couldn't believe I was in the mailroom having produced that many shows. And I was going out on a delivery with an armful of packages in New York. And I got in the elevator. Another young man who had been in the mailroom, we're going down, and he said to me, I'm really excited when I get back. I have an interview. They just transferred a senior agent from LA to New York in the music department. And I have an interview to work on his desk. So we went down in the elevator. He went left on 57th Street. I watched him turn the corner. I went back in the elevator, went right into that agent's office, introduced myself, said, I'm your guy. We talked for about 10 minutes. He hired me on the spot, and I was out of the mailroom in 7 days. I always tell when I teach classes, I talk about how important that knowledge is power, and sharing information and how you share it is really important. You know, I took advantage of a piece of information that I was given. That agent who hired me was Terry Rhodes.
Nice.
Terry is probably the best pure booking agent I had ever met back in the 70s. He was a genius.
And the best quotes in the business.
Always Tuesday.
It was great.
Nobody watches a rental car, Luke.
Yeah. I worked for him for about 5 months. And then he said to Shelley Schultz, who was running the department, we're wasting this kid as an assistant. We should put him in the college department. He's booking all my colleges for me, and he's crushing it. And Shelley said, we're not making any 21-year-old kid who's been here 5 months an agent. He's got to come work for me. And I went to work for Shelley as his second assistant. He had a client named the Bay City Rollers. You guys may or may not remember them. They had a song called Saturday Night. And in 1977, they were the biggest band in the world. They were on top of it. But by 78, 79, it was over. And we had booked a huge arena tour for them. It was a disaster. They were doing about 1,000 people a night in arenas. And they didn't want to cancel because they knew it was over and they wanted the money. And Shelley called me in his office 3 days into the tour and said, I'm sending you to Louisville and you got to convince them to cancel the tour. And if you convince them to cancel, I'll make you an agent. And if you don't come back. Hand to God, that's a true story. And off I went to Louisville to convince the Bay City Rollers to cancel a tour. That's how I became an agent at 22 years old. I was there for about 3 years. In the spring of 1981, I've now been an agent a couple of years, and my ex-college housemate, John Sykes, who'd been working for Epic, calls me and says, I'm leaving Epic Records. I'm about to start a new business, and we really want you to join us. You could be the number 4 guy there, senior VP of Artist Relations. We want you to meet this team. And so I go meet Les Garland and Bob Pittman and John.
How old are you roughly now?
1981, I'm 25, 24. And they explain that they're going to make these mini movies and call them videos, and they're going to put them on cable TV. But of course, there is no cable TV. It doesn't exist in 1981. And I looked at the three of them and said, that's the stupidest idea I have ever heard. Nobody's going to watch music on TV and nobody has cable TV. I'm not giving up my job. And I turned them down. And of course, in August of 1981, MTV went on the air. And I always tell people, you know, you're always going to have crossroads in life. You're always going to have decisions to go left or right. And there are no bad decisions. You go with your heart and you go with what your passion is. And if you're wrong, you can always pivot back. But being paralyzed over making a decision is one of the worst things that you can do. And it worked out pretty well for me to stay being an agent. The irony is about 9 years later, John Sykes came to work for CAA. So it all goes full circle. I passed on the MTV job. I stayed at ICM till summer of 1984, and I was doing really well. And Tom Ross and I had become really good friends, and Tom wanted me to move to LA and work at ICM LA. I hated Los Angeles and didn't want to go. ICM convinced me that if I went, I only had to stay 2 years. So I agreed, since it was the headquarters. I packed my truck, put all my furniture, sent it off to LA. I went to Miami to visit some friends, and I got a call that I had to fly back to New York because the day my furniture left, Tom Ross resigned from ICM at the beginning of December. Flew back. Shelley Schultz put a contract in front of me and said, you need to sign your contract. And I said, Shelley, look, I love this place. You guys have been great to me, but I'm not going to sign until I know who my boss is. It was a back and forth. They sent me to Los Angeles. And then at the time, Jeff Berg, the head of ICM, called me into his office and said, you got to sign. We need to know you're committed. And I'll shorten the story, but I basically put out my hand and I said, look, Jeff, I'm in. And you have my word that I will stay for the next 6 months, but I'm not going to sign a contract until I know who my boss is going to be. He said, that's unacceptable. Take 24 hours to either come back with a signed contract or pack up and leave. 2 days later, I came back and packed up my stuff and left. No job. Was in LA for all of 10 days. Didn't know anybody. And it wasn't being cavalier. I was 26. I didn't believe in signing a contract and being stuck somewhere where I didn't know who I was working for. I had offers within a day from William Morris and then Triad. And I get this phone call from a guy I never heard of named Mike Ovitz, who says, hey, can you come meet me? We're thinking of starting a music department. I didn't even know what CAA was. It was 27 people. The entire agency was 27 people. I show up at his door in jeans and a T-shirt and cowboy boots. He's in a black suit and a tie, and everybody there's in a dark suit and a tie but me. We talked for about an hour and a half, was mesmerized by his vision and what he had built. Shook his hand and said, I'm in, let's go. And he then told me that Tom Ross was going to come and run it. And January of 1984, we started CAA.
That's quite a ride. You've done more than 2 years in LA.
Well, no, I ended up staying a lot longer. Well, I got married within the first year of being in LA to a pop star, which, of course, was an interesting adventure, and been married for 32 years and 5 wonderful kids. But yeah, once you get married, you're sort of stuck here for a while. And certainly marrying a pop star took me on a different adventure than I had expected when I moved out. So.
Now, every interview I've ever heard NiteLite do, you are normally the first question they ask. And I think the fact that the two of you are so successful in this industry, we got to ask about your brother at RCA. You and Nick, obviously he's 10 years younger than you, but you're both so successful in this business. That's got to be nice to play off of, that you guys have each other as resources.
My brother is maybe the most amazing magician I have ever met. I don't know how he does what he does. I'm going to reference a movie, and most people are too young to know it, but there was a great World War II movie called The Great Escape. And in the movie, James Garner plays this character who literally in the middle of a prison camp can get you anything you want. You need German uniforms, he can get them. You need a milkshake, he could get them. Like he just had this way of pulling rabbits out of hats that you couldn't believe. And that's who my brother is. He just makes things happen and is unflappable. You know, I had helped him get a job way back when at the Ritz in New York. You know, he was a roadie for a long, long time and then became a great tour manager. And, you know, he's a pretty remarkable guy. I don't think people appreciate what he brings because he makes it seem so effortless, so that when he's pulling these rabbits out of his hats or putting shows together or events together, he does it so effortlessly. People just go, of course, well, that wasn't that hard, but it's hard. And he's a pretty remarkable man.
Probably the only record label exec in the business that also worked in the rodeo.
That is true. I keep pictures of that on my phone so I can show people when they ask about it.
Now, the phrase pulling rabbits out of hats, I've read that you've used that in a few different interviews along lines of not just about your brother, but about yourself too, and your ability to conjure up things that didn't exist before. And I think that may be a trademark part of your legacy from where I sit, is just the innovation and the forethought of which you've had about deal making over the last 35 years. Certainly, I think probably had that before you landed at CAA, but tell us about that innovative spirit that you reached to find some of these different deal structures or different opportunities or different things that you put together. Pulling rabbits out of the hat seems to be a family trait. It's not just your brother, it's you as well too, right?
Well, it's funny. If you came to my office, you'd see there's a stuffed hat on my coffee table where you literally pull a rabbit out of it. I've had it there for years. I think the job of being in the service business, and I don't care if you're a manager, an agent, a great record executive, lawyer, we're all in the service business. We work for the artist. The artist doesn't work for us. And working for the artist, we're also working for the fan. And our job is to find ways to say yes. And our job is to find ways to make things happen. So I'm always coming at it from two different point of views. In running the business, I'm looking for, where is there a hole in the business? Where is there a vacuum that I can fill? In the day-to-day of deal making, I'm not a conflict sort of deal maker, right? There are agents who are yellers and screamers and stamp their feet and they get what they want that way. I'm a deal maker that's always trying to find the win on both sides and creatively look for a piece that somebody else hasn't asked for that isn't a hard give, right? So I'm not going to reference the artist, but I had done a big deal for a big artist at Madison Square Garden many years ago. The manager said to me, "Is this the best deal you've ever seen at the Garden?" And it's long before the Billy Joel deal. And I said, "Well, it's a great deal. Is it the best deal? I haven't seen every deal, but based on my knowledge." She said, "Well, is there anything we could ask for that somebody else hasn't gotten?" And of course, everybody goes immediately to money. And this was a multiple day run. And I said to the manager, "Well, why don't we get them to pay for the full page ad in the New York Times? They probably have a much better rate than anybody else. And that'll be our VIG, sort of our bonus to get this confirmed." And the Garden loved it because they had a pre-existing deal with the New York Times. It wasn't a big hit for them. It was a way to close the deal. We saved all that money on the ad budget, which inevitably came back to the artist. And everyone felt great about the deal. So it's looking for those little windows, those vacuums, those holes, and say, how can you fill it? And that's how I've approached everything I did. When you talk about innovation, and I could give you, 4 or 5 things that CA had done that no one else had done. When we hired Ali McGregor, no agency had ever had a marketing person. The goal there was I was watching all my staff basically doing the marketing for every show that they booked. And it was time consuming. Everyone was sort of stepping over each other because no one knew any one market better than the other. It wasn't their expertise. But the reason it was happening is the management companies didn't have the bandwidth to do it. And certainly the labels weren't looking to take on that responsibility. And so here was this idea, why don't we hire a marketing person? And we loved Allie, and she came in for 6 months. We were literally just trying it out. And 25 years later, we have 11 full-time people, and every agency has a marketing person. But it was a hole. And my job was in the service business, fill that hole. The same thing happened in the private events business. We got a call for a client and I answered the phone and they wanted to book this artist for this particular private show. And I said he wasn't available. And I hung up the phone. This is 20 some odd years ago. And I went, well, that was stupid. Why didn't I try to sell him somebody else? Even though they were looking for that act, I should have sold them somebody else. And I thought I should have somebody just doing this. We'll funnel all the calls through him. And we hired a young man at the time named Robert Norman, who was in that area, booking MOR stuff. And I said, Robert, you're not going to be an RA for acts, even though he does a number of big clients. You're going to service these event producers. And I want them to be your first call. I want them to call you first. I want them to wake up and think, if I have an event, I'm going to call CAA because they'll have somebody for me. And very quickly, we went from doing the odd show. His first year as an agent, he booked $6 million in dates. Last year, he booked $152 million in private events. Whoa. No exaggeration. Purely because we service that industry in a very special way. And those buyers know they're going to get attention. They know they're going to get a client. They know they have an agent who understands what their needs are. And the clients love it because they love doing those gigs. But it was filling a void. It wasn't genius. It was saying there's a hole here and I'm going to go fill it. And so a lot of what we've done is just trying to find the opportunity and taking a little bit of time to step back and look at it from a much bigger point of view.
Now, as a full-service agency, you guys represent literature and film and TV and obviously sports and music. And it's become a global company, New York, Nashville, Miami, London. I mean, you got Emmett Banks on your team, for God's sakes. That's the coolest thing in the world. So such a vast company going in so many directions at once. How does that help the artist that you have all these additional resources available and different opportunities?
Well, you sort of hit it. You're giving them opportunities to do other things, but it only works if you have a culture where everybody's actually working to support everybody else. And, when you mention Emma, I've always felt like I am blessed. If you think about my team, and if you've ever been around me at a gig, I always say, these are my partners. I've never referred to myself as the boss. And when someone says, oh, this is my boss, I said, no, this is my partner. I look at the company as incredibly horizontal, but, I've got 22 superstar agents on my staff. Any one of them could run the department. Every one of them has multiple arena attractions. It's really murderer's row of superstars. I was showing somebody once a comparison in agencies. And if you look at all the agencies, from number of senior agents who have multiple arena attractions, number of women, diversity, there is no agency. If you took 5 agencies, it doesn't compare to CAA. And I'm not saying that arrogantly. It's just the facts of that we put this incredible group of people together who actually like and respect each other. That translates to the rest of the company. So when the film department, when we need something from film, or we need something from the book division, or we need something from podcasts, they're stepping up. They know that we count on them, and we do the same thing for their clients. But that goes back to the Robert Norman story. We were the first agency to ever have a crossover agent, a full-time person in the music department who did film and TV and soundtracks, right? That department's now 4 full-time people. So, we have 2 talent agents who work in music, who are doing nothing but sourcing opportunities in that space. We have a book agent who, just did the autobiography deal for Stevie Wonder, but has done 10 deals, from Lana Del Rey to poetry books for clients to children's books for Tim McGraw and Carrie Underwood and Kelly Clarkson. And so it's just a sort of thought process, and you believe in it, and it works. We're not perfect, and we don't always get it right. I could say the same thing about sponsorship. We were the first agency to have a full-time sponsorship division, because you don't hit home runs every day, but it's such a collaborative team, and the respect level is so high that it's paid huge dividends over the years. So I get very sensitive when I talk about my partners and the staff, because when I say we're the best, I'm not saying it from an arrogant point of view. I really believe when you look at it and you see all these superstar agents and all this talent and all the cool deals we're making, it really speaks volumes for itself.
I couldn't agree more in the perspective of culture, because we talk a lot about why agencies and firms are successful. And one of the reasons that I've just observed in passing is the culture of CAA. And one of the things that I'll occasionally wander into your partner's office here in Nashville and catch a glimpse of your company credo, which is often pasted on the wall in a framed photo or something like this. The gist of it is take care of your comrades and good things will happen.
That's right.
Phenomenal extension of the things that I used to read about in The Mailroom by David Resnick, where they talked about how the company culture was about we call each other back first, and then we call everybody else outside the building next. I think that's something that you have taken an elevated way beyond that. I would just love to hear how you think that culture has separated CAA and your team from the rest of the field that you're competing against right now, and what difference that's made in the way that you do business.
Well, it becomes just organically real. You can't force people to do it. When we opened the Nashville office 25 plus years ago, it was a big conversation because we wondered, would this culture translate? We were only in LA at the time. And what we found out, because it worked so well in Nashville, and Nashville was started by Ron Baer, John Huey, and Rod Essig, was that if you had the right people, it worked. If you had the wrong people, it didn't matter. And we're not perfect. We've had agents come and go. But for the most part, the team has stayed pretty solid over a really long period of time because everyone's bought in. And so that obviously is a big part of it. And then when young people come up and they see it work, then they buy into it as well. So as you go through the program, and we, more than half our staff is homegrown, they see it work. I've told this story a couple of times in pitch meetings, so I'll tell it here. On the Beyonce formation tour, her manager called and said, Beyonce wants a young, unknown hip-hop artist to open up all these shows. Could I put a list together? I said, sure, we'll put something together for her. And I went to a new agent we had just hired named Joe Hadley, who had come over from Paradigm and, was a little nervous coming to a big company, and he wasn't sure, if all this culture crap was real. I asked him if he would put this list together. And he did an incredible job. He took all these young artists and had links to videos and links to music and backgrounds on each artist. And he sent it to me. And I would argue that any head of any department at any other agency would have taken that email and cut and pasted it and sent it to Beyonce. I took that email and I called the manager and I said, Steve, I'm going to forward you something. I didn't do this work. This young man did it. He knows it much better than I do. He put in the time. So I'm sending you his work, and I'd love you and potentially Beyonce to meet him because he's really the brains behind it. And I sent it forward. And 3 days later, he's in a meeting with Beyonce at 26 years old. Now, what comes out of that? One, I look smart because I've empowered someone who knows more than me, right? I'm not pretending to know something I don't. Two, I've made him a more important agent because he gets to tell people he's on the Beyonce team. And he is, legitimately is. And three, it tells the entire rest of the staff, the guy who's in charge is actually not going to take credit for my work. He's going to share and help promote me and elevate me to the best I can possibly be. So when it starts at that level and all the leadership thinks that way, then it just translates through the whole company. And people believe that their work's going to be valued, that they're going to get opportunities that they wouldn't get anywhere else. And they work a little harder, and it's paid off over 35 years.
Let's stick with the mentoring for a second, because that's amazing. But as a head of an agency, finding new talent, developing new talent, bringing that out of them is a big part of your job. But not just at work. It's talked about that you're very good at offering your time to young people in the business that are coming up. And those rumors through the industry have gone around for a long time. You're very giving of your time and helping with mentoring. Is that got its own reward for you?
Going back to where I started, I am the luckiest son of a bitch on the planet, right? I get to do what I love. I made a great living. I have an amazing wife, incredible kids. I've been afforded things in my life that I never thought could ever happen. So that notion of giving back and sharing is just intuitive to me. It's part of what I've done. And so, if someone says, can I pick your brain? Can you be in this pitch meeting? Can you be part of this signing meeting? Can you help me with this deal? Why wouldn't I do that? I'm not a big believer in legacy because I could go through the history of the industry and you think about all the superstar executives who no one remembers. So I think legacy is about the people you've touched. And if they take your message and carry it on, even if it's not attributed to you, that's the best legacy you can leave. Sort of passing that on is important to me. How I'm perceived in the music industry today is not going to change. There's no one I could sign, no deal I could do, nothing I could do that is going to change how people look at me. After 40 years, you like me, you don't like me, you have your preconceived notion. So I don't need the accolade to say I signed an artist or that I booked a particular tour. I'd rather somebody else have that opportunity and learn for it. And just like Joe, I could give you 20 stories like that. The more I empower my young staff, the stronger CAA stays. And so the more people who are working on real clients, whose clients break, who get that opportunity, whether I was behind the scenes helping is irrelevant. It only makes the agency stronger by doing it that way.
Obviously, leadership is just an incredibly important part of your work, your life, your success. Do you have things that you learned along the way in the areas of leadership that made you a better person, a better husband, a better leader? What's been one of the key ingredients or a few of the key ingredients of your thinking along the lines in terms of leadership of a large organization like this?
The most important thing and I say this when I teach college classes, is learning how to listen. Talking is easy. It's learning how to listen and really understand and that's true whether in your personal life on a date or trying to sign a client. And I'll give you two quick sidebar stories to that. Going all the way back to the Bay City Rollers, when people say, well, how did you get them to come off the road? Well, when I got there, Eric, the lead singer, literally looked at me when I walked in the room at noon and said, if you're here to get us to cancel the tour, you might as well go home. And I looked at him and said, well, that's not why I'm here. I'm here to support you. That's what your agent does. And I spent the day with them. And by the time the show was depressing as could be, but we went to dinner after and I asked them, how did you get here? You guys didn't go into this trying to be a teen pop band. Tell me about your history. Tell me about your love of music. And we had this really great conversation. And the more they talked, the more I understood who they were. And there was a moment, it's about 2 a.m. and I looked at these guys and said, you know what the shame is here? You should have never been a pop band. You really should change your name and lose the tartan and go make a different kind of record and go live your dream. And they look at me and say, well, what do we have to do if we want to do that? And the answer was cancel the tour, right? And they did. And everything I promised them, we changed their name. They went to the Rollers. They did a new record for Arista. I booked them a really cool club tour. It didn't work. They weren't that good, but I listened to what they said, all right? There was a client that we signed many, many, many years later. I was now head of the department. And one of my agents came in and said, there's this great singer-songwriter. His name is James Morrison. He's a big artist in the UK. And he's sort of halfway in the door at William Morris, but I love this kid. Would you meet with him and the manager? And we sat down in the meeting, and I spent the first 45 minutes of this meeting asking him about him, his music, his influences. We talked about his life, how he got to it. Was incredible. And at a moment where it felt appropriate, I pivoted and talked about CAA. And when he was leaving the meeting, he literally gave me a hug and said, that was the best meeting I've ever had. It was like you were reading my mind. And the reality is, it was just listening to what his motivations were and what he wanted to do. So I think truly listening and understanding people for who they are, because everyone's not the same. What motivates one person doesn't motivate another. What creates fear and fragility in one person is different than in someone else. Artists especially, and maybe I learned that from being married to an artist, but the fact is, if you don't understand what's motivating them and what their concerns are, the managers, if you're not listening, then you can't really communicate back. I've always said to my young staff when they're pitching new artists, if you go into a meeting and you present a plan and you haven't asked them anything about themselves, you're not doing a good job. You don't know if that artist wants to do 100 shows a year or 10. You don't know if they like to play live or they don't. You don't know if they want to open for someone or only want to play on their own. Like, all that information and why it's important to them is really critical, right? So if an artist says, I don't want to open for somebody, okay, well, explain to me why. What put that notion in your head? And that answer helps me to be a better agent when I'm trying to communicate with them. The ability to listen and comprehend and have the patience to then put that into how you move forward is really, really important.
You say when you've taught classes at colleges, do you actually teach classes, or have you just been guest lecturer?
I've been a guest. I've never taught a class. I do a lot of lectures at NYU, and I've done it at Howard, and I've done it at USC, and obviously a lot at Syracuse and Belmont. And it's really more a class on life lessons than it is the music industry. You know, I some of these stories I've told you, I tell in those classes, you know, whether it's knowledge is power and how you share information, learning to be a good listener. It's one of the things I learned even as a writer. It's very hard, but training yourself to ask questions that are not yes or no questions is a skill, because most people will say, did you like the show? And you'll go yes or no, right? But being able to say, what did you like about the show is a whole different mindset. And so as an agent and to be able to communicate, those skills become really important. And then being able to translate it. I'm always telling young agents, when you're going to tell somebody you like something, to just write somebody after a concert, hey man, great show, means nothing. But to write, I love that concert, that third song where you did the guitar solo really was incredible. The way, you know, you transitioned song 6 to song 7, you know, how the lights worked on song 8. It's not so much the detail. It's just telling the artist, I was paying attention. I was listening. So whenever I get a tape and I just listened to a new artist and that we're trying to sign, and I heard the 5 songs and I wrote this long email, and the manager called me after and said that email had more detail in it about the songs than I got from the A&R man at the record company. Right. Nice. And I said, well, okay, but she said, no, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, because it told me you actually listened to the songs and you understood, at least from my perspective, what they were about. So yeah, I when I teach, it's more just lessons in listening and communicating. And I've seen 10,000 concerts, guys, 40 years at 250 shows a year. You know, I've seen a lot and learned a lot. And I watch, and in that learning, you know, I've watched some of the most brilliant people in the world. When you watch Irving work behind a desk with a client, when you watch John Landau, who is brilliant, when you watch, you know, a Bruce Allen or a Doc McGee or Corn Capshaw, you know, I could list 20 more managers. I'll leave somebody out. You know, even watching Scooter as a younger manager, or Jeffrey Azoff. You know, I'm always watching how they communicate. I'm watching how they do their job, because I'm picking something up from it and learning to do it a little better.
You mentioned the Beyoncé team earlier. CAA has been really big on building teams behind artists. It used to be the thing in the old days where this was my act. But CAA seems like they're really big at, these are the 3 or 4 people on your team. What's the advantage of that? Because it seems like it's really like something you guys have really adopted.
Well, when you say the old days are still here. There are a lot of agencies and a lot of agents who operate sort of in a boutique. It's my client. I'm going to handle it.
Absolutely.
And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. Listen, my respect for Dennis Arfa and what he's done for Billy Joel, or Howard Rose and what he's done for Elton John is off the chart. They're brilliant at what they've done and have done great deals. And I can point to a lot of agents who operate that way. But it's always been my feeling that more eyeballs on a project and more interaction just makes the process work better. It doesn't mean that one person is a running point. You know, if Brian Greenbaum is booking the Bob Dylan tour and he's doing every show and he runs point on that, you know, Jeff Frasco is running point on Carrie Underwood. Chris Dalston is doing all the work on Bon Jovi. And so the team is really focused behind him or her. But, you know, Emma, the same thing. Emma, you know, runs the Chili Peppers around the world. But because there is this backstop of other people, someone's going to pick up the phone and call somebody else and say, what do you think? Someone's going to turn around and say, give me your insight. So when you look at just what's going on in Las Vegas, by example, you know, we've done more residency deals than all the other agencies combined.
That's fascinating. Oh,
my God. You can't imagine how many. But the backdrop to that is that if someone has a client and wants to go do a residency and is putting a deal together, they've got the benefit of 3 or 4 other agents to call and say, tell me how you did it. Tell me what the pitfalls were. What did you learn? How can I make this deal better? What should I be pushing for? What should I be giving up? Having that camaraderie and that ability to share information makes everybody smarter. It does. And I think most managers like having that resource. They like their person. I mean, they want their team captain, and that captain's going to run it. But the ability to say, can we get Rob on the phone, or can we get Alison McGregor or Shannon Fitzgerald on the phone, or can we get somebody on the phone who worked on that deal or did a deal in that venue, just helps tremendously.
Out of all the things that you've accomplished in the last 35 years, and we can keep it specific to CAA, what's been the single most proudest moment that you've had as an agent in business here in music? We can start music stuff, but I also want to talk about the personal stuff as well, too.
Wow. It's so hard to boil down, you know, oh, I booked this tour or I did this deal. I've never quantified it that way. I will tell you, when I took over from Tom, one of the greatest agents of all time. I mean, when he left, he was legendary and still is. And that's why I say legacies are hard, because people don't appreciate the great agents from the 70s and 80s. And when he left in 98, I remember coming home to my wife and going, God, sweetheart, just let me last a year. Let them find out I'm not a fraud and I don't know what I'm doing. Let me just make this last a year. And when I got to 5 years, I remember coming home and saying, I can't believe it's been 5 years. Boy, if I could just get to 10, people might actually think I know what I'm doing. So it's more the length of time and getting to work with such incredible artists and people. So it's sort of a blur. I mean, we can talk about specific tours that I loved and artists, and I'll tell you my favorites, but it's that constant camaraderie of people that I really enjoyed being around. And so I don't know that I could say, wow, this moment changed the game or is the one. You know, to have 5 children and an amazing wife and be able to pull that off is really the high point. So I will use that moment when I got honored by the City of Hope and was the first agent to ever be honored. I remember them saying, well, who's going to give you the honor? And in the past, it had been an executive or an artist. And my kids really wanted to do it. And they said, great. And my 5 children got up and each spoke about their father. And it was sort of this moment of my business life and my personal life in this intersection, and it all had seemed to work. If you know anything about me, I have a little Tinkerbell hanging from my windshield, and I have Tinkerbells all around, because the beauty of Tinkerbell is that she only exists if you believe. If you don't believe, she dies. And so that's sort of how I've approached this. I just believe in my team and my family and sort of my notion. And if we all believe, it's going to be healthy and it's going to live. And if we don't believe, it goes away. So that moment was probably a pretty special moment for me on a level. The business side, you know, I could tell you the 5 greatest shows I've ever seen and why, and then there'd be 50 more behind it.
There is so many awards. CAA is always nominated for Agency of the Year and wins it a lot of the years. The Power 100 list from Billboard, there's a lot of that. But I want to ask you particularly about Polestar's Agent of the Year award. It's named after a very close friend of yours and how that's special to you. Can you talk about Bobby?
Yeah, I wrote a piece for Left Sets on him 5 years ago. It's been 30 years since he passed, 30 years in August. And I encourage people to go back and find that piece because it really speaks to who he was. You know, I was blessed when I first started that Bobby was one of the first people I met. And when I was an assistant at ICM, he was an assistant at the desk beside me. And we had met each other in college. He was at St. John's and I was at Syracuse. And he was just the most personable, outgoing, funny, irreverent man I had ever met. But he had this ability, and I wish I had it, to remember everyone's name, and it didn't matter what they did. From the ticket seller to the security guard at the back gate to every roadie on a tour, and he made everybody feel like they were important. Everybody. And he cared about all of them. It wasn't an act. He really cared, and he would follow up with them. And it was an amazing thing to watch. And trust me, there's a picture of him on my desk in the office because I always wonder, had he lived, we would certainly be doing this together. I would have never done this alone. And he would have been one of the greatest agents to ever live because he just was a magnet for talent. Artists loved him the same way roadies loved him. But what you come to realize as you do this a long time and you meet as many people as I've had the good fortune to meet, people are who they are. You could never learn to be Bobby Brooks, right? He was just inherently that person. I was actually having lunch today with somebody and talking about what is charisma, because we always think about charisma in artists. And I've defined charisma in my class when I talk about it is the ability to touch people beyond the five senses. And when an artist has charisma, you know it instantly. That sort of magic, that mystique that just draws you in. But there are executives who have that, and managers and label people, and they just become this beacon. People want to be part of the energy that person has created. And that was Bobby. And so to die at 36, really at the beginning of his career, and have 3,000 people show up at his memorial is pretty unbelievable. I still miss him today. It's one of those rare people that flash through your life that are irreplaceable. Really great guy. A lot to learn from him for a lot of young people. He was pretty special.
Touching on the personal side of things, I mean, there is an intersection with business, right? But you are very involved in a number of things outside of work that are very admirable, from your service as a board of trustees member at Syracuse University to your work on the Music Cares Board to my favorite, your work with the Tiger Woods Golf Foundation. You've done a number of things outside of CAA and work in general. Outside of work, what has been the most fulfilling work for you outside of music? We can include for this conversation Music Cares and your work with Nile Rodgers and his We Are Family Foundation and all the boards you're on. But of those things, what has been the most fulfilling thing?
Well, I believe in all those causes. I have tried to work with foundations that do things that are tangible, that I can touch. When you work with City of Hope and you go there and you can see what they do. When you work with Nile, WAF, you see the kids that it touches. Same with Tigers Foundation. So I'm trying to help organizations that actually touch people where I can look back and go, wow, that made a difference in someone's life. Somebody benefited from what happened there. And this notion of giving back, which everybody says they want to do, and I applaud that, is that when you've been lucky and blessed, part of that responsibility is to share some of that and give some of it back. And so, again, I'm not saying everyone has to do it. It's just sort of part of my DNA in that regard. And I love what Music Cares does. I mean, I think that people who have lived on the road and made a living from this profession and then find themselves in a tough position, that there is a safety net to help them, is incredibly admirable. I think it's great what Music Cares does. I love what Michael Rapino's done with Crew Nation, and really important in that regard. But my work at Syracuse, probably the most fulfilling, because I see the students, and I always felt that 4 years gave me all this opportunity. The classes I took, and I talk about those in my lecture, and the people I met and the growth curve in my own life, to experience things. I'm not sure I get here if I hadn't gone there. And so my way of saying thank you is to go back there. And so whether it's teaching, working on the board of trustees, I just recently, and I'm only saying this because it was in the press, 3 scholarships at $100,000 apiece for diversity candidates in television, film, music, and performing arts because I wanted other kids to have the same opportunity I did. The first 3 kids to get the scholarships came through, and it actually felt kind of neat to know that, where I started my path, I'm giving someone else that same opportunity. So they're all important, but Syracuse has a special place in my heart, only because I don't think I'd be sitting here if it wasn't for my experience there.
That's amazing. You didn't mention that you're on the board of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and I don't think that there is a higher level of cool that you can be involved with than bringing rock stars and giving them that moment of bringing them into the hall. It's what the hall has become in the last 15 to 20 years. It's amazing.
Well, first, the Hall of Fame, was started by an incredible group of people, Jan Wenner and Ahmet Ertegun and John Landau and some legendary people, and they built an incredible platform. And, as new people have come in, and I've been fortunate enough to be involved for 10 years, it is a very special honor. And it's something that I hope is aspirational, mostly for the artists, but even for executives, that to be honored in that way is a really big, big deal. And, there are times when people say it's political and why did this person get left out and how come this person got in? It's not a perfect science. And it's not for me to get into the details of it. But I will say this, that as someone who sat on the nominating committee for 10 years now, it is a room of about 30 executives, artists, executives, writers, led by John Landau. It is the most passionate, intelligent, thoughtful room of people. If you had the ability to be a fly on the wall and you sat there for those 4 or 5 hours every year and watched each person nominate the people they think belong in and give the backstory of why they're nominating them and the conversation that goes on, you would very quickly understand none of this is haphazard. None of it is political. It's done with great care. It's not perfect. Some artists should get on first ballot. Some don't. Some get overlooked by mistake. There's no hall of fame or honor that's done perfectly. But I promise you, I sit in that room every year in awe of the passion and the understanding that goes into it. It's been a real privilege to be a part of it and sit in that room with some incredible artists and some incredible managers and label executives who bring nothing but smarts and intelligence to it.
Now, we've skipped the COVID conversation intentionally because there's a lot more to talk about and unpack. But while we're in the nonprofits and talking about some of these great things, Save Live Events Now is something CAA is involved with Live Nation and AEG and the Grammy Foundation and the Union and so many others. Can you talk a little bit about that as it's just rolled out in the last couple?
Well, just as a quick overview on COVID, obviously this is a tragedy that in some ways probably shouldn't have happened this way. I won't get into the politics of it, but it is sad to see live music disappear that way, the way it has. If I've come to one conclusion over this 6-7 months, is that as a society, I think we were a pretty materialistic society when this started. It's what did you drive? What did you wear? What kind of sneakers did you have? Those sort of material things were important. And I think we're going to come out the back of this and be really an experiential society. I think we've all realized all that stuff really doesn't matter. What matters is we miss our friends. We miss live music. We miss seeing each other. We miss sharing experiences that we took for granted. And so when that hose gets turned back on, it's going to be a gusher. I just think it's going to come back with a fervor. It's going to be like a man in the desert who hasn't drank for months and suddenly the hose gets turned on. It's just not going to be enough water for them. So it's going to be magnificent. The Save Live Now, I think it's just trying to bring incredible awareness that as all these industries, the airline industry, the food industry, all these other industries are screaming at, look at where we're dying, that we get overlooked. And it's really important that people understand how many hundreds of thousands of people work in this industry. And then more importantly, how many millions and millions of people benefit from the art that we bring them and how much it enriches their lives. So I think it's a great thing. I think a lot of the different causes, but I am hopeful that and optimistic that we're going to start to see this all come back next year in the summer. And I believe 22, 23, 24 are going to be some of the best live music years we've ever seen.
So maybe we get a little lighter for the end here since we've asked some pretty heavy stuff. What was the first client you actually signed?
It was sort of a blur at the moment. So there were 3 that sort of came at the same time. There was an artist named Rupert Holmes who had the Pina Colada song, and I had heard the song early, and I signed him. There was a band out of Canada called The Kings that had a song called Switchin' to Glide that Randy Phillips managed. And I loved the song. And it was sort of in that neo-punk second wave, British invasion wave, when all these cool bands were coming from England and suddenly Canada and America had all these cool young bands. And Randy Phillips was being chased by everyone, and he gave this young guy a shot. I've never forgotten that. But the big one was Bryan Adams. I had heard the Cuts Like a Knife record because Phil Q was at A&M at the time and played me the record. And I just thought this kid was amazing. And actually, I booked his first gig in America. He played a 25-cent beer night at J.B. Scott's in Albany, New York. And I was flying up to see it. And Phil and I were going. And I only remember this story because it tells you how long ago it was. I went to LaGuardia. We were going on a prop plane. Phil was late and literally ran out on the tarmac and waved the plane down, and it stopped and let him get on because there was no security. There was it didn't exist. He literally could run out and stop and jumped on the plane, and off we went. So
like he's hailing a cab. It's awesome.
That's how long ago that was. But a lot of signing was being put on great teams. Tom Ross put me on a team with Bette Midler, and I became Bette's agent. And through that, got to meet Bon Jovi. Very early on, Tommy Mottola took a liking to me, and I worked on Hall & Oates. And from Hall & Oates, he gave me Mariah Carey.
How did Bette Midler lead to Bon Jovi?
Because they had the same attorney.
Because you wouldn't think they brunched together or anything.
Yeah, it's one of those things you get if you do your job well, part of your job, again, something I tell young agents, you're signing artists because you believe in those artists, but you're really building a series of relationships that will last you a lifetime. And those relationships, when you deliver on them, pay dividends and continue to pay dividends. And you never take them for granted, and you expect nothing of them. So I have the great privilege to represent Sting, obviously managed, by Miles Copeland. But when he left, he signed with a woman named Kathy Shanker. Kathy was a publicist at A&M, became an independent publicist. We've been friends for 25 years at that point. And she called me one day and said, "Hey, I'm leaving PR. I'm going to go be a manager. I'm going to manage Sting. Do you want to represent him?" Yeah, sure, of course I do. Yeah. What do I got to do? Where do I got to go? Well, if you want to do it, you're in. It took me 25 years and a 30-second phone call to sign Sting, right? Nice. But that's just being a good person and having follow-up and caring. And there's lots of stories like that. So much of when you hear about people signing or clients moving, it's based on relationships and good work, and people have heard good things. And so, when we go back to the beginning of this conversation, when people hear about the culture of CAA and the teamwork or whatever they've heard about me in terms of follow through and caring, that they can hopefully take it to the bank and go, I want to be a part of that. And so the sign becomes a little bit easier, and you want to continue to do that with young artists when you're sitting in a room with a 16 or 17-year-old. Hope that translates to them as well.
Luke wrote one that I think is great. What keeps you up at night?
I hope this answer doesn't sound arrogant. I carry the weight of everyone who works with me and for me on my shoulders. I feel really responsible for their livelihoods and their kids and their schools and their homes and helping them be the best that they can be. And I feel bad when, we had to furlough a couple of people, and I feel bad when someone loses a client or someone is sick, and I take it very personal. I worry about where the industry is going. I worry about, keeping people upbeat and optimistic. Like I said, my legacy, or whatever people perceive of me, is what it is. And I'm going to be blessed to sign hopefully some great clients, and I have great clients, but I worry for the bigger whole. And my wife sometimes thinks I'm crazy to carry that burden, but I think that's part of the responsibility, that if you're going to take this job on, then you have to worry about all those people and give them every opportunity to succeed. And so I don't want to let them down. That's what keeps me up at night, believe it or not. And I wake up very early. I'm up at 4:30 every morning with my head going, answering emails, trying to figure out ways to be better and service clients better and give people opportunities. So,
which is impressive, since you do go to a lot of shows. It's not uncommon to catch you at the Forum and actually servicing your clients and going to dates.
I probably go to more shows. I get asked all the time, are there more than one of me? Because I go to so many shows. And that is purely a function of, I don't think you can ask your team to go out if you're not willing to go out. I think artists are looking to see you there and participating and watching. But at the end of it, I just love live music. If you were ever to interview with me for a job, one of the key questions I ask is, why do you want to do this? And what do you love about music? Because this is really a stupid fucking career if you don't love it, right? I don't know anybody who said, I'm doing this because I'm going to make a lot of money, or I'm doing this because I'm going to have a lot of fame. That may be something that comes from it. But at the end of the day, you got to love this. You got to want to be in that club trying to find that new band or that new singer. You want to feel exhilarated when somebody gets to the next level or plays an arena, or you've created some opportunity because you've manipulated the situation and you go, wow, look, we just pulled that off and we made that happen. And when those moments happen, it's just fantastic. So yeah, I go out because I think that's where the energy is. My wife says to me all the time, why do you work so hard? Can't you slow down? And I've said this for 20 years, and I don't like rabbit out of my hat. There isn't a fast lane, a middle lane, and a slow lane. The music business is one lane. You're either in it and you're moving as fast as you can, or you're on the side of the road. And when you pull over and you're on the side of the road, it goes rushing by you. So I've chosen to stay in the lane, and I'm going to work and run as hard as I can to stay with that flow. And someday I'll pull over and it'll go by me. But you can't not be going out and experiencing it. You can't tell if an artist is great until you see who they're playing in front of and how that audience is reacting and why they're reacting. And I think the best agents have to do that.
Do you have any advice for the people coming up behind us in the industry?
Well, besides doing it because you love it, learning to listen, having empathy and being considerate for those around you, trying to understand artists. I've always, I had the benefit when I started. The industry wasn't as sophisticated as now. When I was a young agent at ICM and we were representing James Taylor and Linda Ronstadt, Peter Asher felt that an agent should cover every show and settle the show. There were no tour accountants. The agent made the deal. They should settle the show. And I was the only single guy on the staff. So I would get sent out for weeks at a time on tour buses with James or Linda. I wasn't on their bus. I was on the crew bus covering shows. And I'd have to get up in the morning and from a hotel room, do my job. And then I'd go to the gig at night and settle the show. Until you sat on a tour bus and gone 3 weeks and know what it is to go 500 miles overnight, you're not really a great agent. Right? It's a tough haul to sit on a tour bus. It's a tough haul to eat catering 3 weeks in a row. And so I think the more people can experience and understand the life on the road, understand how fans interact, the more information you can take in, the more questions and things you can learn, the better you're going to be at your craft. And the more you listen to. Having seen 10,000 shows, I probably have a better eye than someone, who thinks their cousin is a great singer-songwriter and has the tape. So experience is the best teacher in that regard.
Life in a single lane for me just cut through so many things about the music business and is such an incredible analogy for it.
I was thinking in both directions, though.
Touche.
I don't know what more to say than that, Rob. That was... Well,
listen, I am thrilled to have done this. I wish we had time for more stories. We didn't necessarily talk about Vegas or some of the great shows, but I am blessed to have done this for 40 years, and yet I still feel like I'm a kid. I told a story at a retreat once where, there are all these agents there, and I'm sort of giving the closing remarks, and I was explaining that 40 years in, I still wake up, and when the phone rings and my assistant says, your client X is on the phone, my heart starts racing because I think I'm going to get fired. I still do. 40 years in, right? Like I go to that place that I am fighting for my life every day and fighting for my associates' lives. Again, my wife thinks I'm insane, but I just approach this with this sort of love and joy and fragility of what it is. And so I take it personal and I approach it like, some kid. I went on 2 summers ago, and if you read my post on Instagram, 2 summers ago, I went on the road. I was on a road trip for 14 days. And in 14 days, I won't remember it entirely, but I saw Eric Clapton, Van Morrison, Bruce Springsteen, Lionel Richie, Lana Del Rey, The Pretenders, God, Santana. I mean, just this incredible road trip. I mean, it was magnificent. And somebody called me, halfway through it or 2/3 through and said, you must be exhausted. Don't you want to come home? Aren't you tired? And I said, you realize there are people who pay $1 million to go on this trip? $1 million to be me for this 2 weeks. and they do it, not even get to go backstage or stay in nice hotels. And I'm getting paid to do it. This is the coolest thing on the planet. Are you kidding? This is the greatest. And that's how I've always approached it. I just think it's the most magnificent thing to get to do, and that somebody wants to pay me to do it, and that they trust me with their careers. It's just magnificent. I've been a very lucky man. And if I can pass it on, then I've really done the right thing and come full circle.
Well, we can't thank you enough for joining us and taking the time. With my last question, I'm just curious, does anybody call you Robbie?
Only my mom.
I'm glad you laughed at that.
It's why all my children have names that are very hard to shorten to nicknames, because I never liked having a nickname. But yes, my mom, she doesn't anymore, but for a long, long time, she called me Rob. Very good, then. No, nobody else.
Promoter 101 with the one and only Rob Light. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys.
Truly an honor to have an icon like Rob Light here on the podcast, and a thrill to get to do an interview in concert with Luke Pierce. It has been since that last live episode that we recorded in Nashville at AIBA that me and Luke have actually interviewed someone together. And I miss that. Truly. That was a fun experience to get to do the back and forth with you and share the interview process. I miss that. I really enjoyed that.
It was a lot of fun to prep and to do this thing over Zoom. And I know there's been a lot of roundtables that we've been a part of, and we've been doing some stuff separately, but it was really nice to be able to sit down and talk through this. I really enjoyed that. And I hope everybody listening took away a great deal. I know that I did from that interview.
Hi, I'm David Kells with Bridgestone Arena and the Nashville Predators, and you're listening to Promoter 101.
The quote of the week comes to us from Live Nation CEO Michael Rapino. A hit is a hit, and when you have a hit, great things happen.
Hey, it's J-Bo Lewis from UTA, and you're on Promoter 101.
As if 2 interviews were not enough today, we are bringing you an extra little lagniappe here. We've got a friend of the podcast today. We're going to hear how he, as an independent promoter, is navigating the turbulent waters of the pandemic, including some drive-in shows that have been crushing in the Midwest with Eliza Schlesinger. Please welcome to the podcast from NiteLite Promotions, Don Kronberg.
Life as an independent promoter in America through the pandemic, what must that be like? Joining us to discuss such an issue, the Midwest's own NiteLite Productions, Don Kronberg, a.k.a. The Earring.
Oh, shut up. I came prepared for this, Steiny. I got my beer in hand because I felt like I was going to be assaulted like on one of those celebrity roasts. So I kind of psychologically prepared for the earring comment. How long has it been since I hit my earrings? About 10 years now. I probably held on to the earring about 10 years, maybe 15 years longer than I should have. So I guess I had it coming to me. So, well, thanks for having me on today, man. And I just want to let you know before I begin, I've got my trusty, sacred Steiny bobblehead to protect me if something goes really, really bad today. So I guess where we begin, well, this pandemic, I'm in a weird state right now. It's been, believe it or not, I've been doing this for 30 years, and I'm only 39 years old. So, must have started at a really young age, 9, I guess that would have been. So,
honestly, you're what, mid-50s?
I'm 57. Yeah, I'm actually sharing that with everybody. I'm 57, but I swear to God, I look 56 on most days.
You look good. You stay healthy. You work out. You're ripped. You got the pythons.
I know. Look at that, right? I got time on my hands right now. So.
I mean, I would put you against Jake the Snake Roberts any day of the week. You guys got to be close to the same age. I think you could take him.
That would have been a really good matchup, actually. Maybe now versus back in the day when he could have kicked my ass all over the ring. Maybe Randy Macho Man Savage would have been more my cup of tea.
An Illinois boy.
An Illinois boy, indeed. Downers Grove, Illinois, him and his brother. So we could talk wrestling. We've talked wrestling on another show, and we should actually talk wrestling. So, running a business right now, running a concert business, running a small independent concert promotions business during the pandemic has been very difficult, just like it has been for everybody else. That first month, I kind of was in denial. I'm like, this is just going to kind of blow through. This isn't a big deal. Actually, the night of the pandemic, when it started for me, was in Illinois at the University of Illinois Springfield when I was with Ron White, and we were 2 hours from showtime, and we were on pins and needles all day long because we had heard that the governor was going to be making some sort of an announcement that day. And we felt it was probably going to be related to stopping performances. We're 2 hours away. I had just said goodbye to Ron as he walked off after doing a quick sound check. So he left and he went on the bus. And then right away, I was called upstairs to the administrative office. And they gave me the news that our governor was not going to let my show go on that night. So I had to go back down, tell Ron that he wasn't playing. He was like, man, are you serious? And, I went on the bus and we shared a few laughs. We shared a few stories. And he was like, you know what? We're going to reschedule this for September. It's going to be all over. And I'm like, oh my God, that's perfect. September is perfect. The audience isn't going to freak out on me. And now we have moved it one more year down the road. So the pandemic is real. So where we're at right now is, after that, we had to figure out a new model, and I didn't know what that model was. And I'm like, can we just exist with nothing? And for a few months, I went, we're going to get the PPP money and we're going to be all right. And we did. We got the PPP money, and then that money was used. And now it was like, oh my God, what are we going to do?
So you got the PPP money, which not everybody did, but that enabled you to keep your employees intact for a while. Have you been able to continue to keep all of your employees on?
I have. You know what? I think one of the saving graces of being an independent promoter is that I only had a couple of full-timers working for me. Everybody else was part-time. Everybody else was an independent contractor. And we used a lot of the building people to do a lot of our jobs as well. So, when it came time to do what we had to do, I was very fortunate that as of right now, I've been able to keep my guys working for me. So I feel really good about that. I want to keep doing that. I want to make it through this pandemic. I want to make it through the craziness, and I want people to have jobs. So obviously it's not benefiting me hugely to have people on the payroll, but I felt it was very important to do that.
I assume I'm not going to ask you percentages, but I assume you've asked your staff to take some kind of cuts like most people in the industry have.
We all did. Yeah, we all did. I mean, it was sort of a given, and it wasn't a horrible pay cut, but, again, if you're counting on the money, it was a pay cut.
Right. But you have no revenue coming in for the most part.
No revenue. My revenue stream has been non-existent since March 15th, I think, or March 20th. I think we had one night at Queen in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and that was our last show. And that played, and that shouldn't have played, but it played. That was the last show. So here we go. And now we decided to dive headfirst into the drive-in business.
Right. So you announced some comedy shows for drive-ins, right?
I've got actually a bunch of shows lined up right now. So next week, we kick it off with a big country show in Fort Wayne, Indiana at the Coliseum parking lot. Over the years, for 25 years, I've been doing shows inside the Coliseum off and on. And now we're doing a show in their parking lot next week, which isn't hugely successful at this point, but it hasn't closed yet. And I actually think that we're going to do pretty well on the walk up or drive up. I guess it's drive up.
That's great. As they come in, you can ask if they want fries with that. What a great new concept. That's part of the new bundle package.
And then, you know what? We follow it up with what should be 2 sold out Eliza Schlesinger shows in my home market in the Chicagoland area the following weekend. So we're pretty happy about that. Actually, I'm really stoked about that. And then we followed up the following weekend with what again should be 2 sold out Aaron Lewis, Sully Erna dates in McHenry as well. So I'm feeling pretty good about life as we speak.
Nice. So you got little metal, little country, little comedy. It's like a normal day at NiteLite.
You know what, man? It's exciting because, I think what we lose track of is, and I know you're the right one to be talking about this too, is that we lose track of what meant the most to us. And that's putting on shows for people, seeing the reaction from people. And I can't tell you, man, how much I've missed that over the last 6 months. So to see an audience next week and the following week and the week after that is going to be exciting. And, we're going to try to book shows right through November 1st in the Chicago area right now. So
did you not know that it snows in the Midwest in the winter?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I have to remind myself every day that last year on Halloween in the Chicago area, we had 5 inches of snow that I had to shovel off my sidewalk. Honestly, the whole model, it's fucked up. The infrastructure cost of doing drive-in shows. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem to me to be worthwhile to do a drive-in show. It seems like the costs are as great as doing the show. The bands can't make very much, and your risk is huge for low reward. I mean, what's the upside in doing it?
Yeah, I mean, good points. I mean, it literally, I had to take apart the model that I was used to, because primarily I do shows in theaters in the Midwest. And a lot of our shows, we're partners with our venues, as we all know. And so our cost of doing a show inside a theater with a fixed stage, possibly a built-in PA, house lighting, I really do take that for granted. And in the drive-in model, we've had to bring in a professional mobile stage, the SL, whatever it might be, 125, 250, 325, depending upon what the show is, full PA or FM transmitters or a combination of both. So it's been a huge learning curve on the production front. And then video. If we're doing it at a drive-in, you can't see the performer from the parking lot. And the next thing you know, you've got to throw IMAG video out there. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of pissed off customers.
IMAG's always cheap, right? I mean, that's only $5,000 to $15,000 a show, depending on your setup. That's going to help your budget right off the bat.
None of it's cheap. I mean, we're looking at numbers, $15,000 to $25,000 in base production costs, and that's without renting the facility. Drive-ins don't want to be partners, by the way, Dan. They want their rent money, and I don't blame them.
Right. Well, it's a new business for them, and, they've never been more popular in their life, so pay us or we're going to go show Grease 2 again.
They are. And you know what? Again, if I own the drive-in, unless you're paying me my rent and you're guaranteeing me my money, I'll show the movie just like you said. So yeah, it's been a difficult journey because when you crunch the numbers, and then we had to come up with pricing module, which is a whole nother beast. And instead of having, that per person ticket purchase that we're used to, or that couple purchasing tickets, we had to sell them a vehicle. And because we're limited on how many vehicles we can put into a drive-in parking lot, the model's completely different. So let's just say you want it to buy 2 tickets. Well, we're making you buy a vehicle with 4 people in it. So you've got to figure out if it's worth it to you as a customer to spend that kind of money. And that's been the learning curve. And you know what? I don't think there's science that shows it works one way or the other. I think it just comes down to who the act is that's walking on stage.
Well, it's definitely a unique experience. You're definitely giving something up on the production. How good is the sound quality possibly going to be through the FM transmitter? It's a serious question of what you're dealing with in each one of these, and you're reinventing the wheel. So hopefully it's worthwhile at the end of the day. It's good to get the acts working. It's good to get the crews working. I know the radio stations really appreciate the revenue coming back in some format. So maybe.
Yeah, well, maybe, and again, we're up against Mother Nature too. So at the end of the day, the weather's been spectacular in the Chicagoland area and in the Midwest for the most part. But as we start getting into this later part of the year, we have to worry that Mother Nature is going to give us not satisfactory weather anymore. And then what do? The customers, we told them that they could sit outside their vehicles with face masks on. Now they're going to retreat to their cars. What kind of experience would that be, if it rains and you've got to go inside and you're watching it through your car window? It's one thing to watch Jaws 2 through your car window, but to see an act that you paid real money for, that's going to be the interesting scenario. And, we'll see how it plays out. We are protected. That's a nice thing about it, that the customer does have a place to go, but it's different. So, it's starting to enter my mind a lot more as we talk to other agents and artists that want to do this now, that, you're going to have to deal with it as an artist when you walk out on stage, but we have to deal with it on the customer front. So, yeah, I got some interesting times ahead of me.
Let's talk about when the world comes back to normal, right? So I assume just like everybody else, you're moving shows, you're trying not to cancel, you're trying to keep the ad revenue and the tickets in place if you possibly can, moving shows down the road into 21, possibly 22. Are you buying new shows on a daily basis for theaters and arenas? Are you actually actively looking for those shows?
Yeah, I wouldn't say on a daily basis, but, I think over the last few weeks, it's starting to get real again. And we're confirming shows for fall of next year. I wouldn't say we're chatting on a daily basis about new content. I think it's a lot of stuff that's just getting pushed back from this year. And now it's going into next fall. And hopefully, for God's sake, it does not go into 2022. But yeah, I'm open. I'm ready for business, man. I'm an optimistic person. I've always been. I always look at the positives in every situation, even in the worst situations like this. And I feel we're going to get out of it. I feel when we get out of it, we're going to be a stronger business. I think our fans are really going to appreciate the product that we put on stage, even more so than they did before. So I'm out there waiting for venues where I can put shows in and feel comfortable and feel safe about them. In Illinois, I'm up against a wall. I've got a governor who's hell-bent on not allowing us to do shows until a vaccine comes along, and we're not even sure if that's the end of it. We have to make sure that the vaccine works. So here in Illinois, it's a lot tougher, but as far as the other states that I service, Iowa, Indiana, Wisconsin, Iowa, and beyond, every state's got its own rules, and I think what it's going to make me do is go into other states that I previously didn't do shows in.
Interesting. So no matter what happens, are you sticking with the business? You're not going to be in a position where you're going to have to close the doors. You'll make it through this no matter what?
It's a really good question. Thought about it a million times. I think I'm in it for the long haul if I know, in fact, there's a window. You know, if it starts creeping up into 2022 and beyond for any reason, I'm going to have to really think about it. I'm 57 years old. I've been doing this forever. I don't need the money. Probably call it a day right now and be fine. I'm not ready to call it a day and be fine. But at the end of the day, if this kept dragging out, I would have to find a different business. I got to get better at golf because I suck at it. If I got better at golf, I think I could go into the golfing profession, probably run a pro shop. I know I can sell you a T-shirt or overcoat right now if I put my mind to it, but I don't want to. I like what I do, man. And again, I love the reaction, the product that I put out there on stage, the reaction that it gets on a nightly basis. Man, I can't replicate that. And I think that's what I keep thinking about. And I think that that's what keeps me coming back every single day.
You're an independent. Let's point out what that means. You're using your own money. You're producing events. Right. You may be partnering with the venues, partnering with other promoters, whatever, but you've got skin in the game. It's not a bank, a big corporation, or anybody else. When you don't sell those tickets and you don't have revenue in, it's directly coming out of your bank account. It affects your retirement plan every time a show doesn't sell.
Every time.
So let's talk about resources. And I'm not talking about cash in the bank. I'm talking about the ability to get information from other people in the business and have that mind trust. AEG, Live Nation, CAA, William Morris, big companies have a lot of people, a lot of resources to help pull together an action plan of what we're doing during the pandemic. As an independent, what are you doing to gather information as you're out there by yourself? You're not 20,000 people in a corporation.
Yeah. You know what? Another great question. At the end of the day, for the first few months, again, I sat there and I watched and saw what everybody else was doing, and nobody was doing anything. For the most part, your company was doing that handful of drive-in shows, but so many of my peers, so many of my independent promoter peers and friends just opted to basically throw in the towel and wait it out. And you know what? I did the same thing. And then at a certain point, I figured out, you know what? If this keeps going, what the hell is it going to look like, not only in my bank account, but what's my office going to look like? Am I going to have anybody working for me? Am I going to be able to get up every morning and trudge to the office? Would it make sense anymore? So I had to come up with a plan, and it wasn't a plan that I felt very comfortable about from the beginning. You know, I had to analyze the numbers, and I still analyze the numbers on a daily basis. And I sometimes just shake my head because, again, the numbers don't make sense quite often, but you've got to kind of forget about it. You've got to look at the audience and go, you know what? There's a lot of hungry people out there. They're looking for entertainment. So that's kind of where the whole drive-in and parking lot scenario came about, and it's working for me.
Sounds like when you dig in hardcore, but you didn't really talk about who else you're talking to. Are you talking to other indies? Are you talking to venues? Are you talking to Live Nation? Who's sharing information with you when you're trying to triangulate and figure out what you're doing and when you're doing it?
You know what? Right now, right at this second, there's not a lot of people sharing information because there's not a lot of guys doing shows. So a lot of our decisions are based off of watching people that we don't necessarily know, but learning their model as best as we can and adapting that model to where it makes sense for my own model. But it's been difficult because the majority of my friends aren't doing anything, and it hurts. I'll get a call from one of them on a daily basis. Hey, what are you up to? And I'm like, honestly, I'm too busy to talk to you right now because I'm in that mindset that I have the ability, I have the skills, knowledge, and I have the money to actually be able to do shows during this pandemic, unlike some of my peers. So it's been challenging because a lot of our steps have been taken by ourselves.
Well, that sounds inspirational that you've kind of got an idea on your way through this. You're figuring out how to work on your way in it, and you're in it to win it. When do you think shows are coming back, Don?
Good way to end this. I feel that business will come back in 2021. I think it'll be baby steps. I think we've all talked about that. I think seeing people in seats at football stadiums like Kansas City last week, very promising. Notre Dame last weekend. Again, those are kinds of things that will work for our business because we can learn from them. But as far as the music business goes and, even the comedy business, I think it's going to be baby steps. I think we have to get people back in these socially distanced venues. It's going to look weird. It's going to feel weird. But I think when people actually do it and they feel comfortable, I think they're going to tell their friends and their family members. And I think the word's going to get out pretty quickly. And I think by fall of next year, we should be operating closer to full cylinder, certainly a lot better than we are right now.
Well, there you have it. Don Kronberg, America's independent promoter from the Midwest, straight to you right here on Promoter 101. Thanks so much, Donnie.
Thanks, Dan.
Don Kronberg, a.k.a. The Earring, representing the indie promoters, particularly in the Midwest, right here on Promoter 101.
This is John Giddings, and I'm on Promoter 101.
Episode 220 in the bag. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Thank you to all of our listeners out there and to our amazing guest this week from NiteLite Promotions, Don Kronberg. Danny Zalesko, go check out his brand new book, All Excess. And of course, CAA Worldwide Head of Music, Mr. Rob Light. Thank you for your time and gracing our listeners with a little bit of your knowledge. Appreciate you being on this podcast. If you like what you heard tonight, today, whenever you're listening to this thing, let us know. Hit us up. We're all over social media, and we want to hear from you. You got some direct feedback for us? Drop us a line. You can hit us at steiny@promoter101.net, and we will answer your emails day or night.
We'll be back soon, or we won't. We have no idea. Anyway, until then, we're wishing you happy, healthy lockdown and that we get out of this soon and back to those sold-out shows in the months, weeks, days, hopefully not years, to come.
Cheers, and call your mother.
She worries.
Hi, I'm Mitch Rose, co-head of the music department at CAA, and I'm on Promoter 101.
Ba-da-ba-ba.